The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn, painting the world in hues of gold and green. I stood by the kitchen window, a mug of coffee warming my hands, watching the world outside. My name is Sarah, and at 35, I've crafted a life that many would envy. A beautiful, sprawling home, a successful businessman for a husband, Mark, who's currently away on a business trip, leaving me to revel in the solitude of our grand, quiet house. But today, as I watched Jamal, our gardener, tend to the roses with an unusual intensity, something stirred within me, a whisper of desire I hadn't felt in years. What would happen if I invited him in for a simple cup of tea, breaking the silence that had become my companion? The sentence is repeated twice at the beginning of the story. It should appear only once to avoid redundancy. I stood by the kitchen window, a mug of coffee warming my hands, watching the world outside. My name is Sarah, and at 35, I've crafted a life that many would envy. A beautiful, sprawling home, a successful businessman for a husband, Mark, who's currently away on a business trip, leaving me to revel in the solitude of our grand, quiet house. Today, however, the silence was to be broken. Jamal, our gardener, arrived as he does every week, his tall, muscular frame moving with a grace that belied his strength. He was tending to the rose bushes, his hands gentle as they pruned away the dead wood, coaxing new life from the earth. There was something about him today, an aura that seemed to fill the garden with a different kind of energy, one that was both comforting and unsettling. I watched him, my curiosity piqued. Jamal had always been a figure of quiet strength, his presence a steady rhythm in our otherwise predictable life. But today, as I observed him from behind the safety of the glass, I felt an unusual stir within me. What was it about him that drew my attention so intensely? The decision to invite him inside for a simple cup of tea was spontaneous, a whim born from the quiet morning and the strange, compelling energy he seemed to radiate. As I stepped out onto the porch, the cool air kissed my skin, a stark contrast to the warmth of the house. "Jamal," I called out, my voice carrying across the garden. He turned, his eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. His smile was warm, his eyes crinkling at the corners, and I found myself inviting him in for a cup of tea. It was an impulsive decision, driven by a need for company in the vast emptiness of our home. Inside, I busied myself in the kitchen, the kettle whistling as I prepared the tea. Jamal stood by the doorway, his presence filling the room. We exchanged small talk about the weather, the garden, and his plans for the day. There was an ease in our conversation, a comfort that felt strangely familiar. As I poured the steaming water into the teapot, I couldn't help but notice how his gaze lingered on me, a silent question hanging in the air. "Do you take sugar?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Just a dash," he replied, his voice deep and resonant. I added a spoonful to his cup, our fingers brushing as I handed it to him. The contact was brief, but it sent a shiver through me, a reminder of the solitude I had been embracing for too long. We moved to the living room, the plush carpet soft under our feet. I sat on the edge of the sofa, watching as Jamal took a sip of his tea, his eyes never leaving mine. "It's been a while since I've had company here," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could catch them. Jamal nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's a beautiful home, Sarah. It must feel lonely sometimes, with your husband away so often." His observation struck a chord, and I found myself nodding. "Yes, it does. But today, with you here, it feels different." I paused, unsure if I should continue speaking or let the silence say what I couldn't. With the tea poured, we sat at the kitchen table. The conversation shifted from mundane to personal. Jamal spoke about his life, his dreams, and the challenges he faced. His voice was soothing, his stories captivating. As he shared, I found myself drawn closer, not just by his words, but by an inexplicable attraction. He told me about his childhood in a small town, the struggles of making ends meet, and how gardening became his escape, his passion. His eyes lit up when he spoke of the plants, the soil, and the sun, as if they were old friends. I listened, entranced by the depth of his passion, the sincerity in his voice. Suddenly, Jamal stood, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked over to me, his movements deliberate. Before I could react, he enveloped me in a hug, his arms strong and comforting. Then, without warning, he kissed me. It was a kiss filled with passion and longing, one that I didn't resist. His lips were warm, insistent, and I felt a rush of emotions I hadn't anticipated. The kiss was like a spark in the dry underbrush of my life, igniting something deep within me. It was intense, a silent conversation of desire and need. I could feel the roughness of his stubble, the warmth of his breath, and the strength of his embrace. What would I do next, caught in this unexpected moment? My mind raced. Here was Jamal, the gardener, not just a part of the landscape but now part of my personal world. The kiss lingered, and as he pulled back slightly, his eyes searched mine for a reaction. I was torn between the comfort of my known life and this new, thrilling uncertainty. My heart pounded, not just from the kiss, but from the realization of what it could mean. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions. I took a deep breath, the scent of tea and earth still lingering in the air. "Jamal," I whispered, my voice barely audible, this changes things." He nodded, his expression a mix of concern and hope. "I know, Sarah, I didn't plan for this to happen, but now that it has, things have changed." The kiss lingered, and with it, a rush of emotions overwhelmed me. I led Jamal by the hand, my heart pounding, towards the bedroom. The room was bathed in soft light, the bed neatly made, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. We stood by the bed, the silence between us charged with anticipation. I could feel the weight of my decision, the crossing of a line that could never be uncrossed. Jamal's eyes searched mine, looking for a sign, any sign, to proceed or retreat. Would I really go through with this betrayal? The air was thick with the scent of jasmine from the garden, mingling with the subtle fragrance of my perfume. My breath caught in my throat as I considered the implications. Here, in this room where I had shared countless nights with Mark, I was about to redefine everything. Jamal's hand was warm in mine, his touch gentle yet firm, a silent promise of what could be. His gaze was intense, filled with a mixture of desire and respect, waiting for my lead. I stepped closer, the space between us evaporating. His breath was warm on my cheek, his presence overwhelming. The decision was mine, and the gravity of it pressed down on me like the weight of the world. My mind flashed to Mark, his laughter, his touch, the life we had built together. But then, there was Jamal, the gardener who had become more than just a part of the landscape. He was here, now, offering something different, something that stirred a part of me, I thought, had long been dormant. I could feel the heat from his body, the slight tremble in his fingers as they brushed against mine. The room seemed to pulse with our shared heartbeat, the tension palpable. "Sarah," Jamal whispered, his voice a mix of concern and longing, "we don't have to do anything you're not ready for." His words were like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge of a precipice. I looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, the respect for my choice. I took a step back, my mind racing. The allure of the forbidden was strong, but so was in that moment, all rational thought fled. I kissed him back, pulling him onto the bed with me. The world outside ceased to exist as we lost ourselves in each other. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated passion, a stark departure from the routine of my life with Mark. Our bodies moved in a dance of forbidden desire, each touch igniting a fire that seemed to consume the very air around us. The sheets tangled around us, the soft fabric a stark contrast to the intensity of our embrace. Jamal's hands explored with a tenderness that belied the strength I knew he possessed, his touch sending waves of pleasure through me, a reminder of the life I had momentarily left behind. The act was over too soon, leaving behind a mix of exhilaration and guilt. Jamal dressed silently, his expression unreadable. I lay there, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. The room, once a sanctuary of my marriage, now bore the weight of our indiscretion. The scent of our intimacy lingered, a silent testament to the breach of trust. What would the aftermath of this moment bring? My mind raced with scenarios, each more daunting than the last. Would Mark sense the change in me? Could I continue to look into his eyes, knowing what I had done? And Jamal, What would he feel when he left this room, this house, and returned to his life outside these walls? I watched as Jamal adjusted his shirt, his movements deliberate, as if trying to leave behind the passion that had just enveloped us. His eyes met mine, a silent question hanging between us. There was no regret in his gaze, only a quiet acknowledgement of the complexity of our situation. "I should go," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. It was not just a statement of departure, but an acknowledgement of the boundary we had crossed. I nodded, unable to find words, my throat tight with emotion. As he turned to leave, I felt the cold air rush in where his warmth had been. The door clicked shut, and I was alone again, the silence of the house now deafening in its emptiness. The weight of my actions settled over me like a heavy blanket. What had I done? Jamal left as quietly as he had come, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The house felt different now, the silence heavier. I moved through the rooms, straightening cushions, wiping down surfaces, trying to erase any trace of what had occurred, but the memory was indelible. Each corner of the house seemed to whisper of our indiscretion, a silent reminder of the line I had crossed. A few days later, Mark returned, his presence filling the house with the usual sounds of home. He was none the wiser, his mind occupied with business deals and the latest market trends. Our life resumed its usual rhythm, but something had shifted within me. I watched him, wondering if he could ever sense the change. His laughter, his touch, they were all the same, yet I felt different, as if I was viewing our life through a veil, slightly out of focus. The garden continued to bloom, a testament to Jamal's care. Every time I looked out the window, I was reminded of that day. The roses, now in full bloom, seemed to mock me with their vibrant colors, their beauty a stark contrast to the turmoil within. The secret was mine to keep, a silent companion in my otherwise perfect life. It was like a shadow, always there, just out of sight but ever present. I found myself lingering longer in the garden, my hands brushing against the petals, feeling the life within them. Each touch was a reminder, a connection to Jamal, to that moment of passion that had altered everything. The garden had become a place of solace and sorrow, a living diary of my betrayal. What would happen if Mark ever found out? The question haunted me, a specter at the edge of my thoughts. Would he see the guilt in my eyes, hear the hesitation in my voice? The fear of discovery was a constant companion, making each interaction with him a dance of careful words and guarded expressions. I imagined scenarios where he might find out. Perhaps he'd notice a change in my behavior, or maybe he'd come home unexpectedly one day when Jamal was here. The thought made my heart race, my breath catch in my throat. How would I explain? Could I ever justify my actions, or would the truth shatter everything we've built together? Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories for you.